Welcome to the Dear Dyslexic Podcast, where lived experience meets real conversation. We shine a light on the stories that need to be heard, with honest and inspiring conversations with people with dyslexia and other neurodivergent conditions like Dyscalculia, dysgraphia, ADHD, and autism. The Dear Dyslexic Podcast is more than just a show. It's a community, a space for connection, and a movement to rethink dyslexia. Subscribe today and join us on our journey, one story at a time. There's so many things going on in my head. One is the trauma of not letting someone use their fingers because we use calculators and spreadsheets. So what's the difference? Two, I feel really sad because, again, I think last time I said I wish I had you as my maths teacher because it makes so much more sense. And I was also thinking it's okay for me to say I'm not that great at maths because I actually am not. And it shouldn't be because I was talking to my sister, she's like, you can't have that type of mindset. But actually it makes sense I would have that type of mindset because I actually have always struggled with it. And so maybe I need to be a bit kinder to myself and say that's okay because you've got strategies and people to help you. Yeah, so yes. I just learned a lot in that last couple of minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, well, that label's tricky, isn't it? And the negative association with it. And if we think about dyslexia, it's the same, isn't it? It's that's full of shame, isn't it? It's full of like, you may as well be saying I'm no good. You know what I mean? But it's more like, actually, what? I just find this really difficult. But it doesn't mean you can't learn it. So it does take time though. So I've been working with an adult for a couple of years now, and she really struggles with maths. She lives with dyslexia, dyscalculia, and maths has never made sense. And so there isn't really a shortcut. You just have to think, okay, this is going to take time, because you really do have to go right back to the basics. And it's kind of like learning the alphabet. If you don't know the alphabet, then it's going to be hard to learn to read a novel without going back to those previous steps. So I really see it as building that scaffolding of those basic facts. And one of the things that I think there's an advantage with in maths that I tell kids about is that maths is a very cyclical subject. So you pretty much do the same thing every year in maths. It's just a bit harder and a bit more complicated. Mm. And that's not the same with literacy and reading. You don't kind of circle back on those things. We just assume you know how to read and spell and we move on. Mm. Whereas with maths, you do fractions each year, you do multiplication, you do division, it just gets more complicated. So I explain to kids that you can actually catch up quite quickly in maths, because if there's a hole in your knowledge and we kind of catch you up on that, well, you're going to be doing it again this year in maths. And so you kind of get another chance at it. And if we can get them up to speed, ready for the next level, then they can pretty quickly catch up with their peers, compared to literacy, which is a little bit more tricky as far as the catching up goes, because you kind of don't get much reading instruction after year 4, year 5, do you? It's kind of assumed that you know how to read. Yeah, whereas maths, you still do keep getting instruction all the time about, well, this is the next thing. There are a lot of assumptions in there, but if you can fill those gaps, kids can catch up.
Yeah, because I remember in year 9, they just said sit at the back of the class, and I was compliant and quiet, so I didn't make any trouble. And I just sat at the back of the class because I couldn't, because I didn't have those foundations, like you say. And but it makes sense that you are building each year, and you can see it as well. Like as you were talking, I can actually see my books from year 7, 8, year 9 as I was going through maths. Still trauma, but I can visualize it in a more positive way as you talk. But it is, and so when you're talking about your adult clients, like it does take so much practice, whether it is reading and writing, which is why we we don't do a lot of literacy intervention because most of the time adults don't have that time and capacity, which is why we're showing lots of different tools to help them if they can't read to the level that they'd like to be able to. So do you
Yeah.
find that with maths as well? Because like you said, you've seen this client for a number of years now, that you really have to put in so much effort all the time, or is it because you're building, it's not as much practice? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Because, even though our neuroplasticity changes, it gets harder as you get older.
Yes. I think that there is no easy solution other than hard work. But the hard work doesn't have to be traumatic or stressful or full of anxiety. It can be enjoyable because you can feel like you're making success, getting success. And if you make it so it's not a huge stretch, then it's doable. I don't want to make it so that someone's dreading doing it because it's too hard. And so it's about having the patience to make those small incremental steps. But it is really important to keep it up. And so, even speaking about adults or kids, we've just had the summer holidays and the kids come back in and it's as if I have never worked with them before. So, I had a student yesterday and this was the first maths session we'd had since December last year. And she, is in year 9 now, and she had forgotten how to count. She was just really, really struggling because her brain had just gone into a different mode, you know what I mean? And none of that practice had happened. And so you can, if it's not something that's really, and I suppose this applies for adults, as in, you don't have it learnt when you're young. So those neural pathways are not as strong when you're old, simply because of time. If you learn something when you're 6 years old or 7 years old and now you're 47, well, you've had 40 years of reinforcing those pathways, haven't you? But, if you're 47 and you've only had a year, and not only is it a new pathway, but you're kind of having to get rid of old habits as well. You know what I mean? It's a lot more difficult, but the mechanism's still the same. And so I think it is about practice. And I really try and encourage the kids to practice every day. Some of them do, some of them don't, and adults as well. But I really understand that sometimes it's just too hard. And so that's fine as well. You know what I mean? You have to listen to yourself because you can over practice and then kind of burn yourself out. And so I think just being patient with yourself, having a plan, going step by step. So if you're an adult that really struggles with maths, you could even just start doing some simple maths. Even those exercises that I was talking about before of counting forwards and backwards, they're really fundamental skills, aren't they? And so we also have skip counting, counting in 5, 10, 15, 20, doing that backwards. Another common one we do is counting in tens, starting at a random number that I give them. So I say, okay, count in tens to 100 and back, starting at 3. So they've got to go 3, 13, 23, 33, 43, 53, up to 103 and then backwards. That's hard, isn't it? That's really hard.
My face says it all.
Yeah. But
you lost me after 13, I think. Did you say 13?
That's right. Yeah. And that transition's always really hard from 3 to 13 to 23. And, kids will often say, especially going backwards, they'll often be 23 and then it will be, I can't remember what they say now, but, it's like 23 or something like that. They just get it all mixed up when you go from those teens to the 20s and 30s. But so that's a really basic skill, isn't it? Being able to count in tens like that. And a really important skill because you have to do that all the time in maths. And so if you're struggling with, adding 10 to 43, and having to stop and think, 53, if you haven't got that pattern automatic, then it just makes it so much harder. And so, we might move from counting in tens to then one of the initial strategies that we talk about, mental math strategies that we work on and practice, is close to 10. And so let's say we're doing 55 plus 9. Well, you could go 55 plus 9, that's hard, but 55 plus 10 is 65. And then I just take away 1, so that's 64. So little strategies like that I specifically teach kids. Another one is doubles or near doubles. So we learn doubles. So if double 8 is 16, then 8 plus 7 is just 1 less, 15. And so that's a little bit more of a tricky one, but learning strategies like that and when to choose the right strategy for that mental maths, it feels very artificial and difficult to begin with, like almost impossible. But with practice, they find themselves getting it. And as I've said before, that success breeds confidence, which breeds success. And, we try and get over that hump of that anxiety that reduces the working memory. And then, once that's gone, then maths becomes impossible, doesn't it? If you're in a state of panic.
And it was interesting when you were saying pattern recognition, because I'm not very good at pattern recognition, which a lot of dyslexics are supposed to be. And so that was, so I wonder if that had been explained to me when I was younger about trying to look at the patterns, whether then I might have been able to build that skill, because it makes logical sense to me thinking of a pattern, but I'm not good at recognizing it's a pattern until you started explaining it. So, I mean, that when you explained, it's like, if I'd known that, there's a pattern to it, then maybe it would have stuck in my head better. But, as you can see in my face, every time you start going off on different and different maths that I can't keep up. And my husband always says to me, "You just don't get that bit, do you?" And I just said, "No, I don't get that bit." But
no, because you just need to practice it.
Yeah, and it's when, like how you said before, once you take it out of the context of the flow, because you've got to actually use your fingers, then it throws everything else out, which makes a lot of sense as well. So I feel like there is a lot more we need to be doing around dyscalculia. And I wonder, are there any, like, I guess as you were talking, like it's quite expensive, isn't it, if you're going to your tutor every week? And then if you've got speech pathologists or OTs or other things. So are there things that you can suggest people do alongside that can help? Because we know finances can be a barrier for people. Like sometimes adults talk to me, sometimes they say, have you ever looked at Reading Eggs? It's based on for children, but it's got some of those building blocks that might help. Are there resources or tools that people can do alongside you or other tutors that can help them to reduce that financial load?
Yes. And so my journey was like this. And so I'm not good at maths. And I mean, I'm okay at it. I don't think I live with dyscalculia, but I'm not great at it, probably because of dyslexia and working memory and all that sort of stuff. But, I kind of scraped through at school. And so when I started tutoring, the first thing I was desperately looking for was a sequence. Like, I want a sequence. Like, where do I start and where do we go? Like, how do we do that each week? That was very difficult to find. And so I think there are a couple of books that gave me really good ideas about those sequences. One of them was the Dyscalculia Toolkit by Ronit Bird, which takes you on a sequential step-by-step, journey of here's where you can start. And it's full of activities and so on. And when you buy the physical book, you get a code, and she has lots of really helpful videos as well. And I found those way more helpful than the book because you could actually see what she meant. So that was when I started tutoring. But before I started tutoring, the thing that really helped me the most was a series of videos by Stephen Chin. So he's really well known in the UK for maths and dyslexia. And I believe that he now runs like an accreditation course in the UK, like a Dyscalculia qualification, like an intensive course. But he has a set of videos called Maths Explained. And for me, you know how before you were saying, that's making sense to me now when you explain it like that? Most of what I said, I think I've probably got from his videos, because I remember sitting through them and going, why didn't anyone ever tell me this? Like, is that what it is? Is that all it is? And so, yeah, he's got a whole bunch of videos called Maths Explained. They're not very expensive. I think I'm going to get this wrong. I would have to look it up, but you can put a link. But, it's probably like only $150 or something, like a one-off purchase, or you can purchase per topic. And he just goes through maths from the beginning to the end. What is addition? What is subtraction? What is counting? And he does it with PowerPoints and just a really good, simple explanation of everything as he goes through. It's not rushed. And the good thing about them being videos is if you're not sure about it, you can go back and watch it again. So even now, occasionally, I find myself going back and reviewing some of them going, how did he explain that again? Because he's so experienced and so good. His explanations are great. So, that would be a simple place to start. And for me, that was me as an adult using that when I started tutoring. And it really helped me just get my bearings of, what is the structure here? Where do I start? What's the sequence? So he has a really good sequence. He's got excellent books that he's written as well. So I think you could probably start there with Stephen Chin, because nothing that he does is, at all controversial or difficult or, is going to lead you astray. He's just a really experienced teacher, and he just, slowly takes you through maths.
Not like dyslexia, where there's all these debates and arguments.
You learn much better when you're physically with somebody, of course.
Yeah.
But, that's not always possible. And as you say, money is always tight. And so those videos of his are excellent. And of course, there's always things on YouTube that you can watch. I do find myself reasonably often watching Eddie Wu's lessons. If I'm having trouble remembering something or understanding it, I go and watch his. I go, yeah. Or I think, that's a great way to introduce that. Because where I think he's excellent is providing that scaffolding for maths. If you notice when he teaches, he always kind of starts with an origin story. So where what he's talking about fits and why it's called what it's called. And so you can really kind of build up that narrative understanding of maths where you can go, that's what calculus is. It's not actually that complicated. It's just solving this problem. So I think there's lots of resources out there, but knowing where to start, I found very difficult. And so I think those videos by Stephen Chin, Maths Explained, will be a great place to start because they're inexpensive. He has some free ones, where you can check it out and see if you like it or not. And then, as I said, you could buy like a fractions module and just look at fractions if you wanted. But they're not that expensive. And so, just working through from beginning to end, I think is good.
It's interesting you saying where that like the background of something comes from, because it does kind of set it conceptually then, doesn't it? I wonder if they should be doing that with dyslexia. Like because in my doctorate we talk about, the concept of dyslexia came up because of people were saying it was word blindness. Yeah. And so, kind of maybe that's what we need to be doing to try and explain, to reduce some of the back and forth around what it is, to help ground it in some context around, what does decoding actually mean, or orthographics and all these terms that are used to explain our challenges. Sorry, I completely digressed, but I thought that was a really...
Yeah. No, I think narrative is really important. And if you think about human architecture, our brain architecture, we're really story machines, aren't we? we think in narrative. We think in what's the story of my life? How does this fit to this? Or at least I do. That's really strong for me. And when there's just kind of some random fact dangling out there that you've got to somehow remember, and there's not a place for it to sit, or there's not like a link for it, then they become very difficult to remember, those random facts. Learning times tables is hard because they're just random facts. You kind of get them into your head just by that brute force of repetition.
Yeah.
But if you can build a story around it, then I think you have more ways to remember it. You have more ways in. And that's something I do with literacy. When I teach kids to read, I pretty much teach them the history of English as well, because then English makes so much more sense. And it's so much easier to remember how something is spelt, for example, if you remember the story behind why it's got that weird spelling, or even just the general kind of history.
I still get I before E, except after E confused. And I say it to myself over and over and still get it back to front. But yes, maybe if I had context as to why it's I before E, except after C, if they could explain to me why it's except after C, then maybe it would have stuck in my head. This is why I don't teach literacy.
Yeah. Well, so much of it is because English is a mishmash of different languages. I've got a chart on my wall there. You can probably see it. Yeah, so this sits on my wall, and we're looking at this all the time because you can see that English, which kind of comes from Germanic, Old English is like a Germanic language. It's only 20% of our language is actually English. And so that's amazing. And 29% is French, 29% is Latin, 6% is Greek, and then another 6% is unknown where these words came from.
Oh my God, I've never known this.
Yeah. And so when you say that, and that's what kids say. And that's what I said when I first discovered. I thought, why hasn't anyone ever told me this? Because here am I looking for solid rules and patterns in English, but they don't exist because it's not actually English, really. We borrow words all the time, every day. And so we've got rules and patterns from other languages. And then unfortunately, along the way, people have tried to fix it. And so, people have gone, oh, this is no good. We're going to make this rule. And now, and that actually sounds logical. It makes it even harder then, because now you've got these rules that don't seem to make sense, and a whole bunch of new words come in from another language and they don't fit that rule. So it's really tricky. And so I think knowing that and hearing the stories behind these difficult words, I do a lot of work with morphology with students, which is, the smallest unit of meaning in a word is a morpheme. And there's a whole bunch of roots, they're called, where they're kind of the kernel of meaning in a word. And often they're not even words that live on their own. Like ject. Ject is an English root, and it means to throw. And so that's why we get eject. So eject, E is out, so to throw out or to force out. And we have adjective, which is to kind of throw meaning at a noun, objective. And so teaching these word parts to kids, first, they get that boost of confidence because now often they know something that their teacher doesn't. They tell their parents about it and so on, and they start spotting it in words. Gives them that boost of confidence, but also because that's how English works, it suddenly doesn't seem so overwhelmingly impossible because there is actually structure to it. English is completely predictable and structured. It's just that it's an incredibly complicated structure that takes time to learn. But if you introduce it tiny bit by tiny bit, as we do new letter combinations, like, why have we got C and K that both make the K sound in English? See? Because it comes from French. And then we had the K that wasn't from French. And so now we have this problem in English of like, what do we do? Because now we've got two letters for the same sound.
Mm.
And then we've got CK that's making K as well. So that's all quite complicated. But when I introduce it, I talk to it. I talk like that about how would you solve this problem? You know, if you were the person in charge of the language. So I think getting kids to have that kind of meta awareness, and I don't know, I think of it as a narrative underpinning to literacy and understanding, you know, not just maths, but literacy and in particular spelling. I think when you have those strategies, you don't feel so helpless. You know, so we have smart spelling as one of the things we teach, which is a strategy for spelling tricky words. And so, you know, I won't go into it now, but you can explicitly teach a strategy and kids can practice it. So when they come up with a tricky word, they're not just lost. They can go, I can try this, I can try this, I can try this, I can try this. And even if it doesn't work, it's still kind of empowering to have, you know, a strategy for it, isn't it? Yeah. So I think it is complicated, but I have that same approach. I know we've gone off on a tangent here, but that same kind of approach of structure, and really this is what people are talking about when they talk about scaffolding. You know, so having that conceptual scaffolding for what you're doing is really important. And, you know, for maths, for me, that comes down to being able to physically represent what's happening in maths. For people living with dyscalculia, they need to link those conceptual squiggly figures to actual physical examples. You know, when we do volume and measurement, you know, I'm getting out water and we're weighing it and measuring it. And so it's sometimes a bit like a science lab, if you know what I mean. But I think those kind of experiences help you anchor the concepts rather than it just all being conceptual words on a page, particularly if you live with dyslexia as well. You know, it's so disconnected even from where that maths came from. You know, because when that maths was invented, it was to solve a physical real world problem. Even the complex maths we have today is about, you know, how do we get a GPS satellite to work? It's still kind of solving a real world problem, isn't it?
Mm.
And so I think, you know,
I still don't understand how sound waves create the TV. And I still say to Daniel, I know it happens, but I just don't understand how it actually works. It always baffles me because there's maths behind it.
Yeah, there's maths. And you know, we often separate maths out, don't we? I think it's a little bit of a pity that maths is isolated from science, because so much of science is maths and so much of maths is science. And I think, you know, as a former science teacher, in my mind, they're not separate subjects. You know what I mean? Like maths is kind of a skill you need for science and vice versa. And so, you know, I think having that hands-on experiential approach to maths is helpful, because kids get much more engaged with it as well. You know, like I've got a big tub of rice when we're doing fractions, and, you know, they've got to work out equal fractions by saying, you know, how many half cups can you fit in a whole cup? And you know what I mean? So those kind of experiences that make it more meaningful rather than just squiggles on a page. Yeah, pizzas.
Well, I would love to have you come on the show to talk about dysgraphia next.
Yes, sure. Yep.
So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure.
Is there any last words you'd like to say before we jump off?
I think I've loved this last little conversation we've had about the whole mental health aspect of it, of how do you be positive. And so I think if you are someone out there either living with a learning difficulty yourself, or you've got a child or someone you support, it is possible to do it. You know, if you get the right support, or even if you're supporting yourself, by taking it little bit by little bit and getting those bits of success, you're not doomed to always be bad at maths or to always be bad at reading. And so I think that's the takeaway, is that just because school didn't work for you doesn't mean you can't learn it. It just means that it probably just needs to go at a slower pace and more fine-grained. I think positive. I think it's good to be positive about it, because I think too many people end up thinking I'm dumb or I can't do it or whatever because of their school experience. But it's not true. You can learn it. It takes time and effort, but you can do it.
If you haven't done so already, make sure you sign up to our mailing list so you can keep up to date with everything we are doing at Rethink Dyslexia. So head to rethinkdyslexia.com.au. And don't forget, if there's anything you heard today that was distressing, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.